I lay bleeding on my kitchen floor, staring at the ceiling while pain shot through my ribs with every breath. Blood dripped from my split lip onto the cold tile beneath me, creating small crimson puddles that reflected the overhead light. My phone buzzed against my hip, and with trembling fingers I managed to read the text from my sister Brielle. "Stay away from us, you brought this on yourself." The words cut deeper than any physical wound Marcus had inflicted during his brutal attack just minutes earlier. As sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, I realized something that made my heart pound even harder. I held the power to destroy their perfect little life completely. I was the guarantor on their $300,000 mortgage application, and my signature was the only thing standing between them and their dream house. Growing up in suburban Columbus, Ohio, Brielle, and I couldn't have been more different. She was 3 years younger than me, born when I was already walking and talking, and from the moment she could smile, everyone fell under her spell. While I spent my teenage years buried in textbooks and calculator ribbons from math competitions, Brielle glided through high school as homecoming queen prom princess and the girl every boy wanted to date. Her golden hair caught sunlight like spun silk, and her laugh could fill an entire room with warmth. I chose a different path, focusing on academic achievements that would secure my financial future, rather than social popularity that would fade after graduation. After college, I built my accounting firm from nothing, working 16-hour days in a cramped office above a deli on High Street. The smell of pastrami and mustard became my daily companion as I slowly attracted small business clients who appreciated my attention to detail and reasonable rates. By 28, I owned a successful practice with 12 employees and lived comfortably in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of town. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable and entirely my own creation. Brielle struggled to find her footing after high school. She bounced between retail jobs, tried community college twice without finishing, and moved back home with our parents more times than anyone cared to count. Her romantic relationships followed similar patterns of intense beginnings and messy endings, leaving behind trails of broken hearts and unpaid bills that our parents quietly helped resolve. Everything changed 8 months ago when she met Marcus Coleman at a downtown sports bar during a Friday night happy hour. He was 32, ruggedly handsome with dark hair and bright green eyes that seemed to see right through people. Marcus worked as a construction foreman for a mid-sized company that specialized in commercial building projects throughout central Ohio. His calloused hands and confident demeanor attracted Brielle immediately, and within weeks they were inseparable. Their whirlwind romance progressed at breakneck speed. Marcus moved into Brielle's apartment after 6 weeks of dating. They got engaged during a romantic weekend getaway to Hocking Hills after just 5 months together. Brielle called me that Sunday evening, practically breathless with excitement, as she described the proposal beside the waterfalls. Marcus had planned everything perfectly. She gushed from the hidden photographer to the champagne picnic that followed. When they started house hunting in February, Brielle approached me about serving as their mortgage guarantor. They had found their dream home in a new development called Meadowbrook Estates, a 4-bedroom colonial with granite countertops and a 2-car garage. The asking price was $295,000, which required a substantial down payment and excellent credit for approval. Marcus's construction income was decent but irregular depending on project schedules and weather conditions. Brielle worked part-time at a boutique clothing store downtown, earning barely enough to cover her personal expenses. Together, their debt-to-income ratio fell short of bank requirements for such a large mortgage. I hesitated when Brielle first asked. Serving as a guarantor meant accepting full financial responsibility if they defaulted on payments. My business had finally reached a comfortable profit margin, and taking on nearly $300,000 in potential debt felt risky. But seeing the hope in my sister's eyes, watching her describe their plans for starting a family and building a life together, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. The climactic twist that would later haunt me emerged during a family barbecue in March. I overheard Marcus on the phone in our parents' kitchen, speaking in hushed, angry tones to someone about payments and deadlines. When I asked Brielle about it later, she brushed off my concerns, saying Marcus sometimes dealt with difficult subcontractors who were late paying invoices. What I discovered months later was that Marcus had been systematically feeding Brielle lies about me from the very beginning of their relationship. He painted me as a controlling older sister who resented Brielle's happiness and success. According to his twisted narrative, I was obsessed with successful men and had deliberately sabotaged Brielle's previous relationships out of jealousy. He claimed I only agreed to guarantee their mortgage to maintain financial control over Brielle's life, ensuring she remained dependent on my approval and support. These fabricated stories poisoned Brielle's perception of my genuine concern and created the foundation for the nightmare that was about to unfold. The first unsettling encounter happened during our father's birthday celebration at Romano's Italian restaurant in April. Marcus cornered me near the restroom hallway while our family was distracted by the dessert presentation. He stood uncomfortably close, his breath smelling of red wine and garlic bread, and made inappropriate comments about my financial independence. "You know, Fanny, most men find successful women intimidating," he said, leaning against the wall to block my path back to the dining room. "But I appreciate a woman who knows how to handle money. Maybe you could teach Brielle a thing or two about investing." His eyes lingered on my figure in a way that made my skin crawl, and when I tried to step around him, he moved to maintain his blocking position. "I should get back to the table," I replied firmly, keeping my voice steady despite my discomfort. Marcus chuckled and finally stepped aside, but not before adding, "Of course, wouldn't want to keep the family waiting. You're always so responsible, aren't you?" When I mentioned the incident to Brielle during our weekly coffee date the following Tuesday, she laughed it off as a misunderstanding. "Marcus has a weird sense of humor sometimes," she explained, stirring extra cream into her latte. "He's just trying to connect with you because you're important to me. He knows how close we are." The second incident occurred during Brielle's birthday dinner in May. We celebrated at the Refinery, an upscale restaurant in the Short North District. Marcus arrived late, claiming his construction crew had run into permit issues that required his immediate attention. Throughout dinner, he dominated conversation with stories about difficult clients and incompetent city inspectors, painting himself as the long-suffering hero dealing with constant obstacles. When Brielle excused herself to take a phone call from our mother, Marcus immediately shifted his attention to me. "You know, Fanny, Brielle talks about you constantly," he said, refilling my wine glass without asking. "She looks up to you so much. Sometimes I wonder if she compares every decision to what her big sister would do." The comment felt like a probe testing my reaction. "Brielle is perfectly capable of making her own choices," I replied carefully. "Oh, absolutely," Marcus agreed quickly. "But having such a successful sister must create pressure. The mortgage guarantee, for instance. That's a big responsibility for both of you. I hope it doesn't complicate our family dynamic." Before I could respond, Brielle returned to the table, and Marcus seamlessly switched back to charming boyfriend mode. But his words lingered in my mind, creating a subtle undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite articulate. The third warning sign appeared during Memorial Day weekend at our parents' annual backyard barbecue. Marcus volunteered to help my father grill hamburgers and hot dogs, positioning himself as the helpful future son-in-law. While our family mingled on the patio, Marcus found opportunities to make pointed comments about my single status and career focus. "Fanny's got her priorities straight," he announced to the group while flipping burgers. "Career first, relationship second. Smart approach in today's economy." The words sounded complimentary, but his tone carried an undertone that made everyone slightly uncomfortable. Later, when I went inside to refill the ice bucket, Marcus followed me into the kitchen. "You know I admire your dedication to work," he said, standing between me and the back door. "But don't you ever want something more, a family of your own?" "I'm content with my life as it is," I answered, trying to move past him toward the door. Marcus didn't step aside immediately. Instead, he studied my face with an intensity that felt invasive. "Brielle worries about you being alone. She thinks you sacrifice too much for your business." He paused, then added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "But I told her some people are just meant to be independent. Not everyone needs what we have." The climactic twist I should have recognized then was Marcus's deliberate pattern of isolating me from potential witnesses during these uncomfortable interactions. He never made inappropriate comments when other family members were within earshot. He timed his approaches when people were distracted by food conversations or activities that drew their attention away from our exchanges. Looking back, I realized Marcus was testing boundaries and gathering intelligence about my personality and relationships. He was building a psychological profile that would later allow him to manipulate situations to his advantage. Every seemingly innocent conversation was actually a calculated move in a game I didn't even know we were playing. When I tried to discuss my concerns with Brielle after the Memorial Day incident, she became defensive and accused me of looking for problems where none existed. "Marcus is trying to bond with you because you're going to be family," she insisted. "Why can't you just give him a chance instead of analyzing everything he says?" Her reaction stung because it felt like a betrayal of our usual open communication. We had always been able to talk honestly about everything from childhood fears to adult relationship struggles. But Marcus's presence had created a wedge between us that grew wider with each passing week. The final warning came in early June when Marcus specifically requested that I come alone to his apartment for dinner to discuss wedding planning details. He claimed Brielle was visiting potential venue sites in their future neighborhood and wanted me to see the apartment where they currently live together. "It'll just be casual," he assured me over the phone. "Maybe pizza and some wine while we go over the guest list and timeline. Brielle really values your opinion on these things." Something about the invitation felt wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what triggered my unease. Marcus had never invited me anywhere without Brielle before, and the timing seemed odd given that wedding planning typically involved the bride's direct input. Against my better judgment, I agreed to the dinner telling myself I was being overly cautious and that refusing would only create more tension in an already strained situation. I had no way of knowing that Marcus had orchestrated the entire scenario using Brielle's manufactured stories about my supposed interference as justification for what he had planned. I arrived at Marcus's apartment complex at 7:30 on a humid Tuesday evening in June. The building was a converted warehouse in the brewery district with exposed brick walls and industrial-style lighting that gave it a trendy urban atmosphere. Marcus buzzed me up to the third floor where he greeted me at the door wearing jeans and a casual button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal his muscular forearms. "Fanny, thanks for coming over," he said with a smile that seemed genuine enough. "Come on in, I've got wine breathing and pizza on the way." The apartment was spacious but sparsely furnished with hardwood floors and large windows that overlooked the street below. A sectional sofa dominated the living room facing a mounted television that was playing a baseball game with the sound muted. Wedding magazines and vendor brochures were scattered across the coffee table, giving the space an authentic feeling of preparation and planning. Marcus poured 2 glasses of red wine from a bottle that sat open on the kitchen counter. "Brielle should be back around 9, he said, handing me a glass. "She's looking at reception venues in Grandview with her friend Ashley. You know how she gets when she's excited about something." I accepted the wine and took a small sip, noting the rich, fruity flavor that suggested an expensive vintage. "This is nice," I commented, gesturing toward the bottle. "Thanks. I figured we should celebrate properly," Marcus replied. "After all, this wedding wouldn't be possible without your help. The mortgage guarantee means everything to us." We sat on the sofa and began reviewing the wedding planning materials. Marcus seemed genuinely interested in my opinions about flower arrangements, menu options, and seating charts. He took notes on a legal pad and asked thoughtful questions about my preferences for various aspects of the celebration. About 30 minutes into our conversation, something shifted in Marcus's demeanor. His questions became more pointed and personal, focusing on my relationship with Brielle rather than wedding details. "You and Brielle are really close, aren't you?" he asked, refilling our wine glasses. "We've always been close," I confirmed. She's my only sibling and I care about her happiness." Marcus nodded slowly as if processing this information. "She talks about you constantly. Sometimes I wonder if she compares me to you, like whether I measure up to her successful big sister." The comment caught me off guard. "I'm sure that's not true. Brielle loves you for who you are." "Does she—" Marcus's voice carried a sharp edge that hadn't been there moments before. "Or does she love the idea of having someone stable like you approve of her choices?" I set down my wine glass, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of our conversation. "Marcus, I think you might be overthinking things. Brielle is genuinely happy with you." That's when everything changed. Marcus's expression hardened and his relaxed posture shifted into something predatory and threatening. "You know what I think, Fanny?" he said, standing up abruptly. "I think you get off on controlling Brielle's life. I think you like being the successful one who gets to approve or disapprove of her choices." "That's not true," I protested, also standing. "I've never tried to control Brielle's decisions." "Really?" Marcus moved closer, forcing me to step backward toward the kitchen area. "Then why did you hesitate when she asked you to guarantee our mortgage? Why did you make her beg for your approval?" "I had legitimate concerns about the financial risk," I explained, my voice rising slightly. "It wasn't personal." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Everything is personal with you, isn't it? You can't stand that Brielle found someone who makes her happy. You can't stand that she doesn't need Big Sister's permission anymore." The accusations were so far from reality that I felt momentarily speechless. "Marcus, I don't know where this is coming from, but you're completely wrong about my relationship with Brielle." "Am I—" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Then explain why you've been trying to seduce me for months." The statement was so shocking and absurd that I actually laughed. "What are you talking about? I've never done anything inappropriate toward you." "The restaurant, the barbecue. Every time we're in the same room, you find ways to get me alone. You touch my arm when you talk. You ask personal questions about our relationship." Marcus's fabricated narrative gained momentum as he spoke, his voice becoming more aggressive with each false accusation. "None of that is true," I said firmly, backing toward the apartment door. "I think I should leave." Marcus moved quickly to block my path to the exit. "You're not going anywhere until we settle this. I'm tired of you playing games with my relationship." "I'm not playing any games. Let me leave." That's when Marcus grabbed my shoulders and shoved me hard against the kitchen counter. The granite edge caught me in the small of my back, sending sharp pain shooting up my spine. As I stumbled forward, trying to regain my balance, Marcus's fist connected with my ribs, driving the air from my lungs in a painful whoosh. "You think you're so smart," he snarled, grabbing a handful of my hair and slamming my face against the cabinet door. "You think you can manipulate everyone around you?" The impact split my lip and filled my mouth with the metallic taste of blood. Pain exploded across my cheekbone as the cabinet's hard surface connected with my face. I tried to scream, but Marcus's hand covered my mouth, muffling any sound I might have made. "Shut up," he hissed in my ear. "No one's going to hear you anyway." The brutal attack continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Marcus kicked me in the ribs as I fell to the floor, each impact sending waves of agony through my torso. He grabbed my hair again, pulling my head back at a painful angle, while he continued his verbal assault. "You want to know what Brielle really thinks about you?" he asked, his voice cold and calculating. "She's sick of your interference. She's tired of pretending to need your approval. She asked me to handle this situation because she doesn't have the courage to cut you out herself." The psychological cruelty hurt worse than the physical violence. The idea that Brielle had orchestrated this confrontation, that she wanted Marcus to hurt me, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Finally, Marcus released his grip on my hair and stepped back, breathing heavily from his exertion. I curled into a ball on the kitchen floor, tasting blood and struggling to catch my breath through what felt like broken ribs. The climactic twist came when Marcus crouched down beside me, his voice returning to the calm, controlled tone he had used when I first arrived. "Now here's what's going to happen," he said matter-of-factly. "You're going to get up, clean yourself off, and go home. You're not going to call the police or tell anyone what happened here tonight." "Why would I do that?" I gasped through the pain. Marcus smiled with cold satisfaction. "Because I know you're the guarantor on our mortgage, Fanny. I know that if we default on those payments, it ruins your credit and destroys your business reputation. And I want you to understand something very clearly. If you cause problems for me, I will make sure we default. I'll file bankruptcy and disappear, leaving you responsible for $300,000 in debt." The calculated nature of his threat revealed that this entire evening had been premeditated. Marcus hadn't attacked me in a moment of passion or anger. He had planned this assault as a method of intimidation and control, using my financial vulnerability as leverage to ensure my silence. "You planned this," I whispered, the realization hitting me almost as hard as his fists had. "Smart girl," Marcus replied. "Too bad you're not smart enough to mind your own business." He stood up and walked to the kitchen sink, calmly washing his hands as if he had just finished preparing dinner rather than brutally assaulting someone. The casual normalcy of his actions was somehow more terrifying than the violence itself. "The pizza should be here soon," he said conversationally. "I'll tell the delivery guy you left early because you weren't feeling well. Brielle will be disappointed she missed you, but I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunities to catch up later." I struggled to my feet, using the counter for support as waves of dizziness threatened to knock me down again. Blood dripped from my split lip onto the floor, creating small crimson stains on the hardwood. "Clean that up before you go," Marcus instructed, tossing me a roll of paper towels. "I don't want Brielle asking questions about blood on the kitchen floor." With shaking hands, I wiped away the evidence of my own assault while Marcus watched with detached interest. The surreal nature of the situation made it feel like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. As I gathered my purse and car keys, Marcus opened the apartment door for me with mock politeness. "Drive carefully, Fanny," he said, "and remember what we talked about. I'd hate for you to make a decision you'd regret." I stumbled down the hallway toward the elevator, my ribs screaming with every step. Behind me, I heard Marcus's door close with a soft click, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. I sat in the emergency room at Ohio State Wexner Medical Center for 3 hours, watching nurses and doctors treat patients with broken bones, heart attacks, and various other medical emergencies while waiting for someone to examine my injuries. The bright fluorescent lights made my head throb, and every breath sent sharp pain through my ribs where Marcus had kicked me. A young resident named Dr. Patricia Williams finally called my name at 11:45. She was probably in her late 20s, with kind eyes and gentle hands that carefully examined the bruising on my face and torso. "These injuries are consistent with physical assault," she observed, making notes on her tablet. "Have you contacted the police about this incident?" "Not yet," I admitted, wincing as she probed the tender area around my ribs. "I'm required to report suspected domestic violence cases," Dr. Williams explained. "Can you tell me who did this to you?" "It wasn't domestic violence," I clarified quickly. "It was my sister's fiancé. We're not in a relationship." Dr. Williams paused her examination and looked at me directly. "Assault is assault, regardless of the relationship between perpetrator and victim. Would you like me to contact law enforcement while we finish your treatment?" I hesitated, Marcus's threats echoing in my mind. The $300,000 mortgage guarantee felt like a noose around my neck, limiting my options for seeking justice. "Can I think about it while you finish the examination?" "Of course," Dr. Williams replied professionally. "Let's get some x-rays to check for broken ribs, and I'll clean up that cut on your lip." While waiting for the x-ray results, I called Brielle from the hospital bed. My sister answered on the 4th ring, sounding slightly out of breath. "Fanny, what's up? I'm just getting back from looking at venues with Ashley." "Brielle, I need to tell you something important. Marcus attacked me tonight at his apartment." Silence stretched across the phone line for several long seconds before Brielle responded. "What do you mean, attacked you?" "He hit me, multiple times. I'm at the hospital right now getting x-rays." Another pause. Then Brielle's voice returned with a hard edge I had never heard before. That's impossible. Marcus wouldn't hurt anyone. I'm looking at 7 stitches in my lip right now, I said, touching the bandage Dr. Williams had applied. He shoved me against the counter, punched my ribs, and slammed my face into the cabinet door. Fanny, that doesn't make any sense. Marcus called me 20 minutes ago saying you left early because you weren't feeling well. He was worried about you. The casual ease with which Marcus had lied to Brielle and her immediate acceptance of his version of events felt like another blow to my already battered body. He's lying, Brielle. I'm telling you exactly what happened. Why would Marcus lie about something like that? Brielle's tone shifted from confusion to accusation. What did you do to make him angry? The question hit me like a physical slap. My own sister was assuming I had somehow provoked the attack rather than believing my account of being victimized. I didn't do anything wrong. We were discussing wedding plans, and he suddenly became aggressive and violent. That doesn't sound like the Marcus I know, Brielle replied firmly. He's never shown any signs of violence or aggression. You must have misunderstood something. There's no misunderstanding about being punched in the ribs, I said, my voice rising with frustration and pain. There's no confusion about having your face slammed into a cabinet door. Brielle sighed heavily. Okay, let's say something did happen. What exactly were you two talking about that led to this supposed conflict? I explained Marcus's accusations about my trying to seduce him and control their relationship, watching my sister's reaction through her responses. With each detail I provided, Brielle became more defensive of Marcus and more skeptical of my version of events. He said you've been trying to seduce him, Brielle asked, her voice tight with anger. It's completely false, I insisted. I've never done anything inappropriate toward Marcus. Really, because Ashley mentioned she thought you were flirting with him at my birthday dinner. She said you kept leaning close to him when you talked and touching his arm. The accusation was so far from reality that I felt dizzy. Brielle, that never happened. I barely spoke to Marcus at your birthday dinner, except when he made me uncomfortable by standing too close. Uncomfortable how? I described the incidents at the restaurant, the barbecue, and other occasions when Marcus had made inappropriate comments or invaded my personal space. With each example I provided, Brielle's responses became more hostile and disbelieving. So you're saying my fiancé has been systematically harassing you for months and you never mentioned it until now? She asked sarcastically. I tried to tell you about some of these incidents, but you dismissed them as misunderstandings. Maybe because that's exactly what they were, Brielle snapped. Maybe you've been reading things into innocent interactions because you can't stand that I'm happy. The accusation felt like a knife twisting in my chest. How can you say that I've always supported your relationship with Marcus? Have you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been looking for problems from day one. You hesitated about the mortgage guarantee. You questioned his background. You acted weird every time we were all together. I was concerned about a major financial decision and some inappropriate behavior. I defended myself. That's not the same as trying to sabotage your happiness. Isn't it? Brielle's voice carried a coldness I had never heard before. Maybe Marcus was defending himself tonight. Maybe you came on to him, and when he rejected you, you got physical. The suggestion was so outrageous that I actually gasped. You think I attacked Marcus? Look at me, Brielle. I'm the one in the hospital with injuries. People get hurt in fights, she replied matter-of-factly, especially when they start something they can't finish. Dr. Williams returned to my bedside with X-ray results, interrupting our increasingly heated conversation. The good news is no broken ribs, she announced quietly, clearly picking up on the tension of my phone call. You have severe bruising and muscle strain, but nothing that won't heal with time and rest. I thanked the doctor and returned to my conversation with Brielle, who had been listening to the medical consultation. 7 stitches and severe rib bruising, I reported. Does that sound like someone who started a fight? I don't know what to believe anymore, Brielle said, but her tone suggested she had already made up her mind. All I know is that Marcus loves me, and we're planning a life together. If you can't accept that maybe we need some space from each other. The climactic twist that shattered my heart completely came in the next part of our conversation. I had expected Brielle to at least consider the possibility that Marcus was lying to show some concern for my injuries or to express confusion about the conflicting stories. Instead, she delivered a revelation that changed everything. "Actually, Fanny, I need to be honest with you about something," Brielle said, her voice taking on a confessional tone. "Marcus and I have talked about your behavior toward him. I know he would confront you about it eventually." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand the horrifying truth. "I mean, I suspected something like this might happen. Marcus told me about your inappropriate comments and the way you look at him. I told him he should address it directly instead of just tolerating it for my sake." The words hit me like another physical blow. "You're saying you knew Marcus would hurt me." "I'm saying I knew he would eventually tell you to back off," Brielle clarified. "I didn't know it would get physical, but honestly, I'm not surprised. You pushed him too far." "Brielle, everything Marcus told you about my behavior is a lie. I have never made inappropriate comments or advances toward him." "That's not what he says. And between my fiancé and my sister, I have to believe the person I'm planning to marry." The finality in her voice made it clear that no amount of evidence or explanation would change her mind. Brielle had chosen Marcus over me, accepting his fabricated version of events without question or investigation. "So what happens now?" I asked, feeling completely defeated. "Now you stay away from us while we plan our wedding and start our life together," Brielle replied firmly. "And if you really care about my happiness, you'll get some help for whatever issues are making you behave this way." The conversation ended when Brielle sent a text message that appeared on my phone screen while she was still talking. "Stay away from us. You brought this on yourself." Sitting alone in that hospital bed at 2 a.m, surrounded by the antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting of the emergency room, I realized that Marcus had orchestrated this entire scenario perfectly. He had spent months poisoning Brielle against me, building a foundation of lies that made his violent attack seem justified. My sister, the person I loved most in the world, believed I was the villain in this story. But as I stared at Brielle's cruel text message, a different kind of clarity began to emerge through my pain and heartbreak. I might not be able to prove what really happened in that apartment, but I didn't have to remain a victim of Marcus's manipulation. I held power that he probably hadn't fully considered when he made his threats about defaulting on the mortgage. If Brielle wanted me to stay away from them, I would give her exactly what she asked for. And Marcus was about to learn that financial leverage worked both ways. I spent the rest of that night in my hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles and listening to the steady beep of medical equipment from other patients' rooms. The pain medication made my thoughts fuzzy, but one thing remained crystal clear. I was done being manipulated and threatened by Marcus, and I was done being blamed for his violence by my own sister. At 6 a.m, I typed a simple response to Brielle's cruel text message, 3 letters that would change everything. Done. Dr. Williams discharged me at 7:30 with prescriptions for pain medication and muscle relaxers, along with instructions to return immediately if my symptoms worsened. The bruising on my face had darkened overnight, creating purple and yellow patches that would take weeks to fully heal. I drove home slowly, every bump in the road sending sharp reminders through my injured ribs. My modest ranch house had never felt more welcoming than it did that Wednesday morning with its familiar furniture and peaceful silence. But I couldn't rest yet. There was something important I needed to take care of immediately. David Weinstein had been my attorney for 5 years, handling everything from business contracts to real estate transactions. Despite the early hour, I called his office and left an urgent voicemail requesting an immediate callback regarding a time-sensitive legal matter. David returned my call within 20 minutes, his voice showing concern when I explained I needed to withdraw as guarantor on a mortgage application. "Fanny, what's going on? You sound like you're in pain." "I was assaulted last night by the borrower," I explained, giving him a brief summary of Marcus's attack and threats. "I need to know my legal options for removing myself from this financial obligation." Jesus Christ, David muttered. Have you filed a police report? Not yet. The perpetrator threatened to default intentionally if I involved law enforcement, which would destroy my credit and business reputation. David was quiet for several seconds, and I could hear him typing notes on his computer. Okay, let's think about this strategically. The mortgage hasn't been finalized yet, correct? Correct. They're still waiting for final approval from the lender. Then you have the legal right to withdraw your guarantee at any time before closing. The bank can't force you to remain liable for a debt you no longer wish to secure. Relief washed over me for the first time since the attack. How quickly can we make this happen? I can file the withdrawal paperwork today if you come into my office this morning. But Fanny, you need to understand that this will immediately terminate their mortgage application. Without your financial backing, they won't qualify for the loan. I understand completely, I replied without hesitation. David's office occupied the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise, with windows overlooking the Scioto River and the city skyline beyond. His secretary Margaret gasped when she saw my bruised face and immediately offered ice packs and comfortable seating while I waited. My God, what happened to you? David asked when he saw me in person. I gave him the full account of Marcus's premeditated attack, including his threats about destroying my financial reputation. David listened with growing anger, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions about the timeline and Marcus's specific words. This was calculated intimidation, he concluded. He researched your role as guarantor and planned this assault as a method of controlling your behavior. That makes it even more serious from a legal standpoint. David's paralegal Jennifer prepared the guarantor withdrawal documents while we talked. The paperwork was surprisingly straightforward, a formal letter to Pinnacle Home Lending stating that I was rescinding my guarantee of the Coleman's G. Hartley mortgage application effective immediately. Once I file this, there's no going back, David warned. Their loan application will be automatically flagged for review, and without your income and credit backing, them approval is extremely unlikely. File it, I said firmly. While Jennifer prepared the documents for overnight delivery to the mortgage company, David conducted some preliminary research on Marcus Coleman's background. Within an hour, he had discovered information that made my blood run cold. The climactic twist emerged when David's investigator called with results from a basic background check. Marcus and Brielle had already committed themselves to massive financial obligations based on their pre-approval letter, assuming that final mortgage approval was a mere formality. According to public records, they signed a purchase contract for the house 3 weeks ago with a 60-day closing deadline. David explained, reading from his notes. They also have documented commitments for a wedding venue, catering, photography, and honeymoon reservations, totaling approximately $45,000. How is that possible? I asked. Pre-approval letters allow buyers to make these commitments before final loan approval. Most people assume the mortgage will go through without problems, so they start spending money and making plans immediately. David's investigator had also discovered that Marcus and Brielle had used their pre-approval documentation to secure credit for furniture purchases, appliance deliveries, and even a new car loan based on their anticipated housing expenses. The scary part, David continued, is that all of these commitments have cancellation penalties and forfeiture clauses. If they can't close on the house, they'll lose deposits on everything and still owe for services already provided. How much are we talking about? Based on what I can find in public records, probably $60,000 to $70,000 in immediate losses, plus ongoing payment obligations for services they can't use. The magnitude of the financial disaster I was about to unleash hit me fully. Marcus and Brielle hadn't just planned a wedding and house purchase, they had built their entire future on the assumption that my guarantee would secure their mortgage. Without that backing, their carefully constructed dreams would collapse like a house of cards. For a brief moment, I felt guilty about the devastation this would cause. Then I remembered Marcus's fists connecting with my ribs, the taste of blood in my mouth, and Brielle's cold accusation that I had brought the violence on myself. "File the paperwork," I repeated. David overnight expressed the withdrawal documents to Pinnacle Home Lending, along with a cover letter explaining that the guarantor was rescinding her commitment due to borrower misconduct. By Thursday afternoon, Marcus and Brielle's mortgage application would be flagged for immediate review. "There's one more thing you should know," David said as I prepared to leave his office. Jennifer discovered that Marcus has been inflating his income on the loan application. His actual construction wages are about 30% lower than what's documented in his employment verification. This additional revelation meant that even if they found another guarantor, Marcus's falsified income information would likely disqualify them from any legitimate mortgage company. Their house purchase was doomed regardless of my involvement. "Will that information come out during the review process?" I asked. "Absolutely. Lenders verify employment and income independently when applications are flagged. They'll discover the discrepancies within days." I left David's office feeling lighter than I had since the attack, despite my physical pain. Marcus had threatened to destroy my financial reputation if I reported his assault. He clearly hadn't considered that I could destroy his financial future without involving law enforcement at all. My phone buzzed with a text message as I walked to my car. It was from Brielle. "Marcus said you missed a great dinner last night. Maybe we can all get together again soon." The casual tone of her message, as if nothing traumatic had happened, confirmed that Marcus had indeed told her I left early due to not feeling well. She had no idea that her fiancé had brutally attacked me just hours after sending her that innocent text. I deleted the message without responding. If Brielle wanted me to stay away from them, she would get her wish in ways she couldn't imagine. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of sweltering Ohio heat that makes the air feel thick and oppressive even before 9 o'clock. I had taken the day off from my accounting firm partly to recover from my injuries and partly to wait for news about the mortgage situation. The pain medication helped with my ribs, but nothing could ease the emotional ache of losing my sister to Marcus's manipulation. At 10:15, my phone rang with a call from David's office. Jennifer's excited voice came through the speaker with an update that exceeded even my expectations. "Fannie, the mortgage company, received our withdrawal paperwork at 8 this morning. They called the borrowers immediately to inform them that their application was being suspended pending review." "How did they react?" I asked, though I could guess. According to Sandra Mitchell, the loan officer handling their case, the female borrower became extremely upset and demanded to know why you withdrew your guarantee. When Sandra explained that guarantors have the right to rescind their commitment at any time, the borrower started screaming about family betrayal and legal action. The image of Brielle having a public meltdown at the mortgage company's offices brought me no satisfaction. Even after everything that had happened, I still loved my sister and wished things could have been different. "What happens next?" I asked. "The review process typically takes 72 hours. They'll verify all employment and income documentation independently, which is when they'll discover the male borrower's falsified wages. And then, complete disqualification from not just this lender, but any reputable mortgage company. Loan fraud goes into a national database that prevents future applications." I thanked Jennifer for the update and settled in for what I expected would be a quiet day of rest and recovery. Instead, my phone started ringing almost immediately with increasingly frantic calls from Brielle. The first call came at 10:45. "Fannie, what the hell did you do?" Brielle's voice was shrill with panic. "The mortgage company says you withdrew your guarantee. They're reviewing our entire application now." "I told you I was done," I replied calmly. "You asked me to stay away from you, so I'm removing myself from your financial obligations as well. You can't do this. We've already committed to the house purchase. The closing is scheduled for next month. You should have thought about that before you chose to believe Marcus's lies over your sister's account of being assaulted." Brielle was quiet for several seconds, then her voice returned with a different tone. Fanny, please. I know we had a fight, but this is bigger than that. If we lose this house, we lose everything. Everything like what? The wedding venue requires full payment if we cancel less than 60 days before the event. The photographer, the catering, the honeymoon reservations. We put deposits on furniture that gets delivered next week. Marcus bought a new truck based on our housing budget. The scope of their financial commitments was even larger than David's research had indicated. They had essentially spent their future income based on the assumption that their mortgage would be approved. None of that is my responsibility, I said firmly. But you're my sister, Brielle pleaded. Family doesn't abandon family over misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. The word hit me like another slap. Marcus brutally attacked me and you accused me of bringing it on myself. That's not a misunderstanding. Maybe there's more to the story than either of you told me. Maybe if we all sat down together and talked it through. I'm not sitting down with someone who assaulted me, I interrupted, and I'm especially not doing it to help fix his financial problems. The second call came 2 hours later with Brielle's tone shifted from pleading to angry. I just got off the phone with our real estate agent, she announced. If we can't close on the house, we forfeit our earnest money and face legal action for breach of contract. That's $25,000 down the drain. Again, not my responsibility. It is your responsibility because you created this situation by withdrawing your guarantee without warning. I created this situation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Marcus created this situation when he decided to assault me in his kitchen. That's your version of what happened. Marcus says you came on to him and got violent when he rejected you. The fact that Marcus was still spreading lies about the attack and that Brielle was still choosing to believe them eliminated any remaining sympathy I felt for their predicament. Believe whatever you want to believe, Brielle, but I'm not changing my mind about the guarantee. The climactic twist that would ultimately destroy their dreams completely came during my third conversation with Brielle that afternoon. Sandra Mitchell, the loan officer, had called them with the results of the employment verification review. They're saying Marcus lied about his income. Brielle said, her voice hollow with shock. They found discrepancies in his employment documentation. What kind of discrepancies? His actual wages are 30% lower than what he reported on the application. Sandra says this disqualifies us from any mortgage with their company, and they're required to report the fraud to other lenders. The revelation confirmed what David's investigator had discovered, but hearing it from Brielle made it feel more real. Marcus hadn't just assaulted me, he had also committed loan fraud that would prevent them from buying any house in the foreseeable future. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, I said, and I meant it despite everything that had happened. Are you? Brielle's voice turned bitter. Because it seems like you're getting exactly what you wanted. You never liked Marcus, and now you've found a way to destroy our relationship. I didn't falsify income documents, Brielle. Marcus did that himself. But you knew this would happen when you withdrew your guarantee. You knew they would investigate everything more carefully. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. I had hoped that removing my financial backing would derail their mortgage application, though I hadn't known about Marcus's fraudulent documentation at the time. What I knew was that I couldn't remain financially tied to someone who threatened and assaulted me. I replied, everything else is a consequence of choices Marcus made. Choices we're both paying for now, Brielle said quietly. The wedding venue is demanding full payment by Friday or they'll cancel our reservation and keep our deposit. The furniture delivery can't be stopped because it's already in transit. Marcus's truck payment is due next week, and without the new house, we can't afford the insurance and registration costs. What about your savings? What savings? We put every penny into wedding preparations and house purchase costs. We were counting on the mortgage to provide the cash flow for everything else. The financial house of cards they had built was collapsing exactly as David had predicted. Every decision they had made was based on the assumption that their mortgage would be approved, leaving them with massive obligations and no way to fulfill them. Maybe this is a sign that you should slow down and reconsider some things, I suggested gently. Reconsider what my engagement, my relationship with the man I love. Maybe reconsider whether you really know the man you're planning to marry. Brielle was quiet for a long moment, and I thought she might finally be ready to listen to my concerns about Marcus's character. Instead, her voice returned with renewed anger. I know Marcus better than you do, and I know that this whole situation started because you couldn't accept that I found someone who makes me happy. You've always needed to be the successful one, the one in control, and you couldn't stand that I was building a life that didn't revolve around your approval. The conversation ended with Brielle hanging up on me, but not before delivering one final accusation that revealed how completely Marcus had poisoned her perception of our relationship. I hope you're happy, Fanny. You got what you wanted. You destroyed my future, and now you can go back to being the successful sister who doesn't have to worry about anyone else's happiness but your own. Friday morning brought another wave of phone calls from Brielle, but these conversations carried a different tone than the angry accusations of the previous day. Desperation had replaced hostility, and I could hear the genuine panic in my sister's voice as their financial situation continued to deteriorate. Vanny, I need to ask you something important. Brielle began during her first call at 8:30. Is there any way you would consider reconsidering the guarantee just until we can figure out alternative financing? No, I replied without hesitation. I'm not putting myself back into a financial relationship with Marcus under any circumstances. What if we modified the arrangement somehow? Maybe you could guarantee a smaller amount, or we could add additional protections for you. The fact that Brielle was still trying to salvage their mortgage application told me she hadn't fully grasped the implications of Marcus's income fraud. Even if I agreed to reinstate my guarantee, which I absolutely would not, no legitimate lender would approve their application once the falsified documents were discovered. Brielle, the income fraud disqualifies you from any mortgage company. Finding alternative financing isn't going to be possible. Maybe Marcus made an honest mistake on the paperwork. People miscalculate their income all the time. 30% inflation isn't a miscalculation, it's deliberate fraud. You don't know that for sure. Maybe his overtime projections were more optimistic than realistic. The mental gymnastics Brielle was performing to excuse Marcus's behavior reminded me of how she had rationalized his assault on me. She was so invested in their relationship that she couldn't acknowledge the pattern of lies and manipulation that defined Marcus's character. Even if it was an honest mistake, I said gently, I still won't guarantee a loan for someone who physically attacked me. But what if he apologizes? What if we all sit down and work through this misunderstanding? There's no misunderstanding about being punched in the ribs, Brielle, and there's no apology that would make me trust Marcus with my financial security. The second call came an hour later, with Brielle's voice tight with stress. The wedding venue is demanding payment by 5 o'clock today, or they're canceling our reservation. That's $15,000 we'll lose completely. Can you postpone the wedding instead of canceling? Postponing still costs us the deposits, and we'd have to put down new money for a different date. We don't have that kind of cash available. What about your parents? Can they help with the immediate crisis? Mom and Dad already refinanced their house to help us with the wedding expenses 6 months ago. They can't take on any more debt. The revelation that our parents had mortgaged their retirement security to fund Brielle's wedding added another layer of tragedy to the unfolding disaster. Marcus's financial fraud and assault weren't just destroying his relationship with Brielle. They were threatening our entire family's economic stability. I'm sorry this is happening, I said, meaning it sincerely despite my anger at how the situation had developed. Are you? Brielle asked. Because you have the power to fix this, and you're choosing not to. I have the power to make myself financially responsible for Marcus's debts. That's not the same as fixing anything. It would give us time to find alternative solutions. What alternative solutions? Marcus committed loan fraud, Brielle. His financial credibility is destroyed for years to come. Maybe we could find a private lender who doesn't run the same verification checks. The suggestion revealed how little Brielle understood about mortgage lending and how desperate she had become. Private lenders who didn't verify income were typically predatory operations that charged interest rates so high they guaranteed eventual default and foreclosure. Those lenders charged 20 to 30% interest, Brielle. You'd lose the house within 2 years even if you could make the initial payments. At least we'd have 2 years to figure something else out. You'd have 2 years of massive debt before losing everything anyway. That's not a solution, it's just a slower form of financial suicide. The third call came at 2 in the afternoon, and I could immediately tell that something had shifted in Brielle's mental state. Her voice carried a frantic energy that made me concerned about her decision-making capacity. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she began. "You said Marcus assaulted you, but you never filed a police report. You went to the hospital, but you didn't ask them to call law enforcement. Doesn't that seem strange if you were really the victim of a violent crime?" I explained why I didn't report it immediately. Marcus threatened to destroy my business reputation if I involved police. Or maybe you didn't report it because you knew the evidence wouldn't support your story. "What are you suggesting, Brielle?" "I'm suggesting that maybe your version of what happened isn't completely accurate. Maybe Marcus was defending himself and you got hurt worse than either of you expected." The conversation was taking a disturbing turn that reminded me of domestic violence cases I had read about where victims were gaslit into believing they were responsible for their own abuse. "I have medical records documenting injuries consistent with assault," I said firmly. "I have hospital staff who can testify about the nature and severity of those injuries. Medical records prove you were injured. They don't prove who caused the injuries or how they occurred." "Are you seriously suggesting I beat myself up to frame Marcus?" "I'm suggesting that maybe you provoked a physical confrontation and got hurt worse than you intended." The climactic twist that would shatter any remaining hope for reconciliation came during my fourth conversation with Brielle that evening. David called me at 6 o'clock with urgent news that changed everything. "Fanny, I need to tell you about something that just happened. Pinnacle Home Lending contacted me about fraudulent documents that were submitted this afternoon." "What kind of fraudulent documents?" "Someone attempted to forge your signature on a revised guarantor agreement and submit it to a secondary lender called Ohio Valley Mortgage. The forgery is obvious because whoever did it doesn't know your professional signature style, but it's still a serious crime." My blood ran cold as the implications hit me. Brielle. The documents were submitted electronically from an IP address that traces back to your sister's apartment complex. Ohio Valley's fraud department has already contacted law enforcement about the attempted mortgage fraud. "What does this mean legally?" "It means your sister is now facing potential criminal charges for forgery and mortgage fraud. These are felony offenses that carry substantial prison sentences." "Can we prove she was the one who actually submitted the documents?" The electronic submission included authentication codes that required access to personal information about you that only a family member would know. Social security number, date of birth, mother's maiden name. The evidence is pretty conclusive. I felt physically sick thinking about Brielle throwing away her future in such a desperate and foolish attempt to save her relationship with Marcus. The woman I had grown up with, who had always been impulsive but never criminal, had crossed a line that would destroy her life far more thoroughly than any canceled wedding or lost house deposit. "What happens next?" I asked. "Law enforcement will contact both you and your sister within the next 24 hours. You'll need to decide whether to press charges or try to resolve this as a civil matter." "And if I don't press charges?" "The mortgage company still has to report the fraud attempt to federal banking authorities. Your sister could face investigation even without your cooperation." I hung up the phone and immediately called Brielle, who answered on the first ring with a voice full of artificial cheerfulness. "Fanny, I was just about to call you with some good news. We found a lender who might be able to work with our situation." "Brielle, what did you do?" The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. My sister had indeed forged my signature in a desperate attempt to save her collapsing dreams, and now she was about to face consequences that would haunt her for years to come. Saturday morning brought Detective Rachel Torres to my front door at 9:15, along with a younger officer named Patrolman Kevin Brooks. Detective Torres was a woman in her early 40s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of my still bruised face. Ms. Hartley, I'm investigating a mortgage fraud case involving forged documents submitted under your name. I understand you may also have information about an assault that occurred earlier this week. I invited them into my living room and offered coffee, which they politely declined. Detective Torres opened a folder containing printed emails and document images, while Patrolman Brooks took notes on a small tablet. Let's start with the mortgage fraud, Detective Torres said. Did you authorize anyone to sign documents on your behalf regarding a loan guarantee for Marcus Coleman and Brielle Hartley? Absolutely not. I specifically withdrew my guarantee through my attorney on Wednesday morning. Can you tell me about your relationship with the suspects? Brielle is my younger sister. Marcus is her fiancé. I was originally serving as guarantor for their mortgage application until Marcus assaulted me Tuesday night. Detective Torres looked up from her paperwork with increased attention. Tell me about that assault. I provided a detailed account of Tuesday evening's attack, including Marcus's threats about intentionally defaulting on the mortgage if I reported his violence. Detective Torres asked clarifying questions about the timeline, Marcus's specific words, and the nature of my injuries. Do you have medical records from that night? I showed her the discharge paperwork from Ohio State Wexner Medical Center, including photographs Dr. Williams had taken of my facial injuries for documentation purposes. Detective Torres studied the images carefully while Patrolman Brooks copied the medical information. These injuries are consistent with the assault you described, she observed. Why didn't you report this incident immediately? I explained Marcus's threats about financial retaliation and my initial concern about protecting my business reputation. Detective Torres nodded with understanding, indicating she had encountered similar situations before. Domestic violence perpetrators often use financial intimidation to prevent victims from seeking help, she said. The fact that you withdrew from the mortgage arrangement shows you found a way to protect yourself despite his threats. Is that how you discovered the forgery? Partially. When your sister submitted the fraudulent guarantee documents yesterday, the secondary lender contacted the original lender to verify your withdrawal. That's when we learned about both the forgery attempt and your reasons for withdrawing. Detective Torres opened a second folder containing background information that would change my understanding of Marcus completely. The climactic twist emerged when she began reading from Marcus's criminal history report. Fanny, I need to tell you something important about Marcus Coleman that your sister may not know. What did you find? Marcus has 2 previous convictions for domestic violence in other states. The first occurred 3 years ago in Kentucky, where he was convicted of assaulting his girlfriend, Sarah Mitchell. She required reconstructive surgery for facial injuries he inflicted during an argument about money. My stomach clenched as I realized how easily Marcus's attack on me could have been much worse. What was the second conviction? 2 years ago in Indiana, Marcus assaulted his roommate, Christopher Davis, during a dispute about unpaid rent. Mr. Davis suffered permanent hearing damage from blows to his head. How is this information not easily available? Wouldn't background checks reveal these convictions? They would if someone actually ran a background check. But these convictions occurred in different states under slightly different name variations. Marcus used Mark Coleman in Kentucky and Marcus C. Coleman in Indiana. Unless someone specifically searches for variations and runs multi-state checks, the records don't automatically connect. Did Brielle know about this? Detective Torres consulted her notes. We interviewed your sister yesterday evening after the forgery was discovered. When we informed her about Marcus's criminal history, she initially denied any knowledge. However, under further questioning, she admitted that Marcus had told her about some misunderstandings with previous girlfriends. Misunderstandings. That's the word she used. According to your sister, Marcus claimed his ex-girlfriends were unstable women who falsely accused him of violence when their relationships ended badly. The psychological manipulation Marcus had used on Brielle was even more sophisticated than I had realized. He had preemptively discredited his own victims by characterizing them as unreliable accusers, making it easier for Brielle to dismiss any future allegations against him. So Brielle knew Marcus had been accused of domestic violence before. She knew he had been involved in what she called relationship drama with previous partners. She believed his version that these women were lying to hurt him. And she never thought to research these accusations independently. Detective Torres shook her head. Love makes people ignore red flags they would normally recognize. Your sister was emotionally invested in believing Marcus's story rather than investigating the truth. What happened when you told her about the medical records and police reports from his previous convictions? She broke down completely. The evidence was overwhelming and she couldn't maintain her denial any longer. Detective Torres turned to a new section of her folder. There's something else you need to know about Marcus's motivations for targeting your family. What do you mean? Our financial investigation revealed that Marcus chose your sister specifically because of your success and financial stability. He researched your accounting business and credit history before he even met Brielle. The revelation hit me like another physical blow. He planned this from the beginning. Marcus has substantial gambling debts to illegal operations in Cincinnati. He owes approximately $70,000 to people who use violence to collect payments. His relationship with your sister was essentially an elaborate fraud scheme designed to access both her money and your financial backing. How did he research my financial information? Public records, social media, and information he gathered from Brielle during their early dates. She unknowingly provided details about your business success, your real estate holdings, and your close relationship with her. So when he proposed to Brielle, he was positioning himself to use their marriage and house purchase as collateral for consolidating his gambling debts through illegal loan arrangements. Your guarantee would have given him access to $300,000 in equity that he planned to leverage for additional borrowing. The scope of Marcus's criminal planning was staggering. Every aspect of his relationship with Brielle had been calculated to exploit our family's resources for his personal benefit. What about the assault on me? How does that fit into his plan? Marcus became concerned that your financial background and protective instincts might expose his scheme before the house purchase was completed. He needed you eliminated as a potential threat, but he also needed your guarantee to remain in place. So he attacked me to intimidate me into silence while keeping me financially tied to their mortgage. Exactly. He underestimated your resolve and your ability to remove yourself from the situation entirely. Detective Torres closed her folder and looked at me directly. Marcus represents a type of predator we encounter occasionally. He targets women with family money or financial connections, manipulates them emotionally, and exploits their resources for his criminal activities. Your sister was a victim of sophisticated psychological manipulation. Where is Marcus now? We attempted to arrest him yesterday evening, but he had already fled his apartment. We believe he realized the investigation was expanding when the forgery was discovered. Has he left Ohio? We issued a BOLO alert for his vehicle and contacted law enforcement in neighboring states. Marcus has a pattern of fleeing when his criminal activities are exposed, but he usually doesn't get far. Detective Torres's investigation expanded rapidly over the weekend as her team uncovered the full scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise. She called me Sunday evening with updates that revealed how close my family had come to being completely destroyed by his schemes. We found Marcus. She began without preamble. State police arrested him at the Ohio-Pennsylvania border during a routine traffic stop around 4 this afternoon. Where was he trying to go? Pittsburgh, according to the GPS route programmed into his truck. We think he has contacts there from his gambling activities. What happened when they arrested him? That's where it gets interesting. Marcus was carrying 3 laptops, a box of documents, and approximately $15,000 in cash. The laptops contained detailed records of his entire criminal operation. Detective Torres explained that Marcus had been documenting his activities like a predator's handbook, maintaining spreadsheets of potential targets, psychological manipulation strategies, and financial exploitation techniques. One of the files is titled Brielle Project and contains everything from her social media posts to detailed plans for accessing your family's money. He documented his relationship with my sister like a business plan, complete with timelines, financial goals, and contingency strategies. He had backup plans for different scenarios, including what to do if you became suspicious of his intentions. What kind of backup plans? Isolation tactics to separate Brielle from family support, character assassination strategies to discredit you if you tried to warn her, even plans for accelerating their wedding timeline if he felt the scheme was being exposed too quickly. The clinical calculation behind Marcus's manipulation was nauseating. Every romantic gesture, every moment of seeming spontaneity had been planned in advance as part of his exploitation strategy. The gambling debts you mentioned, how serious are those? More serious than we initially thought. Marcus owes money to 3 different illegal operations, not just in Cincinnati, but also in Louisville and Indianapolis. The total debt is closer to $90,000 with interest accruing weekly. What would have happened if he had successfully gotten the house? Detective Torres paused, and I could hear her turning pages in what I assumed was her case file. According to his laptop files, Marcus planned to use the house as collateral for borrowing from private lenders, who don't ask questions about the source of funds. He would have taken out additional loans against the property's equity and used that money to pay his gambling debts. And when those loans came due, he planned to default and disappear, leaving Brielle responsible for all the debt. Your guarantee would have made you liable as well. The climactic twist that revealed the true scope of Marcus's criminal activities came when Detective Torres described what else police found in his possession. Marcus had documentation suggesting he's done this before, she said. We found records of at least 4 other women he's targeted over the past 5 years, all with similar profiles to your sister. What kind of profiles? Women with financial family connections who were emotionally vulnerable due to career struggles or relationship problems. Marcus specifically seeks out women who have successful relatives willing to help with major purchases. What happened to these other women? 2 of them lost substantial amounts of money before Marcus disappeared. One declared bankruptcy after being left with debts Marcus had accumulated in her name. The 4th one discovered his scheme before he could complete it and cooperated with law enforcement in Indiana. Is that how you connected him to the other domestic violence cases? Partially. The Indiana victim, Jennifer Walsh, had been trying to warn other potential targets about Marcus's methods. She contacted us when she saw his name in connection with the mortgage fraud investigation. Detective Torres explained that Jennifer had been trying to track Marcus across multiple states, documenting his pattern of targeting women and building criminal cases against him wherever possible. Jennifer's cooperation is why we were able to move so quickly on the arrest warrant. She had already done much of the investigative work connecting his various criminal activities. What charges is Marcus facing? Assault and battery for the attack on you, mortgage fraud for the income falsification, identity theft and forgery for the documents submitted under your name, plus the gambling-related charges from other jurisdictions. How much prison time are we talking about? If he's convicted on all counts, probably 15 to 20 years. The federal banking fraud charges carry the heaviest sentences. What about Brielle? What charges is she facing? Detective Torres's voice softened slightly. The district attorney is still deciding how to handle your sister's case. The forgery charges are serious, but given that she was being manipulated by Marcus and has no prior criminal history, they might offer a plea agreement. What kind of plea agreement? Probably probation, community service, and restitution to the mortgage companies for their investigation costs. She'd avoid jail time if she cooperates fully with the prosecution of Marcus. And if she doesn't cooperate, Then she could face up to 5 years in prison for the forgery and fraud charges. The magnitude of the legal consequences facing both Marcus and Brielle was overwhelming. What had started as a simple mortgage application had spiraled into federal criminal charges that would affect multiple lives for years to come. Detective Torres, can I ask you something personal? Of course. In your experience with cases like this, do the family relationships ever recover? I mean, between the siblings or relatives who were manipulated. She was quiet for several seconds before responding. Sometimes, it depends on whether the victim can understand that they were manipulated by a professional predator, not just someone who made poor choices. Your sister was targeted specifically because of her emotional vulnerabilities and family connections. But she still chose to believe Marcus over me even after I was assaulted. That's what makes these predators so effective. They don't just lie to their targets. They reconstruct their entire perception of reality. Marcus convinced your sister that you were the threat to her happiness, not him. How long does it take for someone to recover from that kind of manipulation? It varies. Some people recognize the manipulation quickly once the evidence becomes overwhelming. Others struggle for years to accept that their entire relationship was based on lies. Which category do you think Brielle falls into? Detective Torres considered the question carefully. Based on her reaction when we showed her the evidence of Marcus's criminal history and his documented plans to exploit your family, I think she's beginning to understand how completely she was deceived. What was her reaction? Complete emotional breakdown. She kept saying she couldn't believe she had been so stupid that she should have listened to your concerns about Marcus. Does she want to talk to me? She's asked several times if you would consider meeting with her, but she understands if you're not ready for that conversation yet. I thanked Detective Torres for the update and promised to stay in touch as the legal proceedings developed. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet house, trying to process the enormity of what Marcus had planned to do to my family. The realization that his entire relationship with Brielle had been a calculated fraud scheme made me feel sick to my stomach. Every family gathering, every wedding planning session, every conversation about their future together had been part of an elaborate con game designed to exploit our trust and financial resources. But underneath my anger and disgust, I felt a growing seed of hope. For the first time since Tuesday night's assault, it seemed possible that Brielle might eventually understand the truth about Marcus and perhaps even forgive herself for being manipulated by such a sophisticated predator. The question that remained was whether our relationship as sisters could survive the damage that Marcus's manipulation had inflicted on our family. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the kind of persistent drizzle that makes everything feel soggy and depressing. I was reviewing client files at my kitchen table when Detective Torres called with news that would finally begin to heal the wounds Marcus had inflicted on our family. Fanny, your sister, has requested a meeting. She wants to apologize and explain some things about her relationship with Marcus that she couldn't admit before. What kind of things? Financial abuse that she was too embarrassed to acknowledge. Marcus had been stealing money from her personal accounts for months, and she just discovered the full extent of it. The revelation didn't surprise me given everything else we had learned about Marcus's criminal activities, but it added another layer of betrayal that Brielle had to process. Where does she want to meet? She asked if you would consider coming to the police station. She thinks having official documentation of her statement might help you trust that she's telling the truth this time. I agreed to meet Brielle at the downtown police station that afternoon, partly out of curiosity, and partly because Detective Torres seemed to believe my sister had genuinely begun to understand the reality of her situation. The Franklin County Justice Center occupied an imposing concrete building near the state capitol with security checkpoints and metal detectors that reminded visitors this was a place where serious crimes were processed. Detective Torres met me in the lobby and escorted me to a small conference room where Brielle was waiting. My sister looked terrible. Her usually perfect blonde hair hung limp and unwashed around her face, and her eyes were red and swollen from what appeared to be days of crying. She had lost weight since our last conversation, giving her face a gaunt appearance that made her look older than her 26 years. "Fanny," she said quietly when I entered the room, "thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." I sat across from her at the metal table, noting how different she seemed from the confident woman who had been planning her dream wedding just a week earlier. Detective Torres remained in the room but positioned herself near the door to give us some privacy. "Detective Torres said you discovered Marcus had been stealing from you." Brielle nodded, pulling out her phone to show me bank statements and transaction records. I started checking my accounts carefully after the police told me about his criminal history. The unauthorized withdrawals go back 4 months. The evidence was damning. Marcus had systematically drained Brielle's checking and savings accounts, taking money in amounts small enough to avoid immediate detection, but large enough to accumulate into substantial theft over time. $12,800. Brielle said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He used my debit card information to withdraw cash from ATMs all over the city while I was at work." "How did he get your card information?" "I gave him my PIN number 2 months into our relationship. He said it would be easier if we could access each other's accounts for shared expenses, like groceries and gas." The financial abuse had been gradual and subtle, designed to avoid triggering Brielle's suspicion while systematically depleting her resources. Marcus had used classic manipulation tactics, framing the access as a sign of trust and commitment, rather than an opportunity for theft. "Did you ever notice money missing before this?" "Sometimes my account balance seemed lower than I expected, but Marcus always had explanations. He said I probably forgot about automatic payments or miscalculated my expenses. He offered to help me budget more carefully." "So he was stealing your money and then convincing you that you were bad at managing it?" "Exactly. And because he seemed so concerned about our financial future, I trusted his guidance about spending and saving." Detective Torres spoke from her position by the door. "This is a common pattern with financial predators. They create problems and then position themselves as the solution, making victims increasingly dependent on their expertise." Brielle turned her attention back to me, and I could see genuine remorse and embarrassment in her expression. "Fanny, I need to apologize for everything that happened after Tuesday night. I said terrible things to you, and I chose to believe Marcus instead of my own sister." "Why?" I asked simply. "Because believing you would have meant admitting that I had been completely wrong about the most important relationship in my life. It would have meant acknowledging that I had ignored warning signs and put our entire family at financial risk." "But you had evidence. I was in the hospital with documented injuries." Brielle's eyes filled with tears. "I know. And deep down, I knew Marcus was capable of violence because he had told me about his previous misunderstandings with other women. But I convinced myself that those situations were different, that he had changed, that our love was special enough to overcome his past." "You knew about his history of domestic violence." "Not the full truth. Marcus told me that he had been falsely accused by unstable ex-girlfriends who couldn't handle being rejected. He said they had made up stories about him to hurt him after their relationships ended." The climactic twist that revealed the depth of Brielle's awakening came when she described how Marcus had manipulated her perception of our family relationships from the very beginning of their courtship. "He asked me detailed questions about you during our first few dates," Brielle explained. "I thought he was just interested in my family, but now I realize he was gathering intelligence about your financial situation and your relationship with me." "What kind of questions?" "About your business success, your real estate investments, how close we were as sisters. He seemed impressed that you cared enough to help me financially when I needed it." But then he started planting doubts about my motivations. "Gradually, yes. He would make comments about how successful older siblings sometimes unconsciously compete with their younger brothers and sisters. He suggested that your willingness to help me might be motivated by a desire to maintain control over my life." "And you believed that?" Brielle wiped her eyes with a tissue Detective Torres offered. I wanted to believe that Marcus understood me better than anyone else ever had. When he suggested that you might be jealous of our relationship or threatened by my independence, it felt like validation of feelings I hadn't even realized I was having. What feelings? Resentment about always being the little sister who needed help. Embarrassment about not being as successful as you. Fear that people only valued me in comparison to your achievements. The psychological manipulation had been expertly crafted to exploit Brielle's existing insecurities about our relationship. Marcus had identified her emotional vulnerabilities and weaponized them against both of us. So, when Marcus accused me of trying to seduce him, you were already primed to believe I would sabotage your happiness. Yes, and I'm so ashamed of that now. You've never done anything but support me and try to protect me, and I let Marcus convince me that you were the threat to our relationship. Detective Torres interjected with additional information that demonstrated how calculated Marcus's manipulation had been. We found detailed psychological profiles of your entire family in Marcus's files. He had specific strategies for isolating Brielle from each family member. What did the profiles say? For you, he planned to exploit Brielle's feelings of inadequacy compared to your success. For your parents, he intended to position himself as the protective partner who could finally give Brielle the stability they wanted for her. It was all planned. Every aspect of their relationship was designed to achieve maximum financial exploitation while preventing family interference. Brielle looked at me with an expression of desperate hope. Fanny, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I chose Marcus over you when you needed my support most, but I want you to know that I understand now how completely I was manipulated. Understanding doesn't erase what happened. No, it doesn't. But maybe it explains why I made such terrible choices. Marcus didn't just lie to me about the assault. He spent months reconstructing my perception of reality so I would be incapable of recognizing the truth. What about the forgery that wasn't Marcus manipulating you? That was your own decision to commit a crime. Brielle's face crumpled as she acknowledged the most shameful aspect of her behavior. I was panicking. Our entire life was falling apart, and I couldn't accept that it was really over. I thought if I could just buy us some time, maybe we could fix everything. By committing federal fraud, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was desperate to save what I thought was the most important relationship of my life, and I was willing to do anything to make that happen, even if it meant dragging me into criminal liability. I told myself that once we got the mortgage approved, I would find a way to protect you from any negative consequences. I convinced myself that I was solving a temporary problem, not creating a bigger one. The conversation continued for another hour, with Brielle providing additional details about Marcus's manipulation tactics and her growing understanding of how thoroughly she had been deceived. By the end of our meeting, I could see that my sister was genuinely beginning to comprehend the reality of what had happened to her. But understanding didn't automatically translate into forgiveness, and Brielle seemed to recognize that rebuilding our relationship would require more than just apologies and explanations. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she said as we prepared to leave the conference room. I just want you to know that I finally see the truth about Marcus and about what I did to you. What happens now? I asked. I'm cooperating fully with the prosecution. I'm pleading guilty to the forgery charges and accepting whatever punishment the court decides. And I'm starting counseling to understand how I became so vulnerable to manipulation. What about the financial mess? I'm declaring bankruptcy. The wedding venue, the furniture, the credit cards Marcus maxed out in my name. I can't pay for any of it, but at least the debt won't affect you anymore. As we walked toward the exit, Detective Torres provided one final piece of information that would influence my decision about whether to rebuild my relationship with Brielle. Your sister has agreed to testify against Marcus in his trial, she said. Her testimony will be crucial for securing convictions on the most serious charges. What does that involve? Detailed testimony about his manipulation tactics, the financial abuse, and his statements about planning to default on the mortgage. It will be emotionally difficult, but it could help prevent Marcus from victimizing other families. The idea that Brielle was willing to endure the humiliation and emotional trauma of testifying against Marcus suggested that her awakening to his true nature was genuine and complete. Tuesday morning brought news that Marcus's criminal enterprise was even more extensive than anyone had initially realized. Detective Torres called me at 7:30 with an update that would ultimately provide the justice I had been hoping for since the night of his assault. Marcus tried to cut a deal with prosecutors yesterday, she began. He offered to plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for information about his gambling contacts and other criminal associates. Did they accept the deal? They rejected it immediately. Marcus doesn't understand that we already have all the evidence we need from his own documentation. He kept detailed records of everything, including plans for future victims. Future victims. Marcus had identified 3 other women in Central Ohio who matched his target profile. He was already beginning preliminary research on their financial situations and family relationships. The revelation that Marcus had been preparing to victimize additional families made me feel both grateful that he had been stopped and horrified by the scope of his predatory activities. What charges is he facing now? 15 felony counts, including assault and battery, financial fraud, identity, theft, money laundering, and racketeering. The federal charges alone carry potential sentences of 20 to 25 years. And the state charges, another 10 to 15 years, depending on whether they run concurrently or consecutively with the federal sentences. The possibility that Marcus would spend the next 30 to 40 years in prison provided a sense of justice that helped balance the trauma he had inflicted on my family. More importantly, his extended incarceration would protect other women from becoming victims of his sophisticated manipulation schemes. What about his gambling associates? Are they facing charges too? That's where it gets interesting. Marcus's detailed records included names, locations, and financial arrangements for 3 separate illegal gambling operations. Federal agents raided all 3 locations yesterday and arrested 18 people on various charges. So Marcus's criminal network is being dismantled completely. His obsessive record-keeping provided law enforcement with evidence that will likely shut down these operations permanently. Detective Torres explained that Marcus's downfall had triggered a cascade of investigations that extended far beyond Ohio. His connections to illegal gambling, money laundering, and financial fraud had tentacles reaching into multiple states and involved dozens of criminals who thought they were safely hidden from law enforcement attention. In a strange way, Marcus's assault on you may have prevented significantly more serious crimes, Detective Torres observed. If he had succeeded in his plan to exploit your family's financial resources, he could have expanded his operations and victimized many more people. The climactic twist that would finally bring complete closure came when Detective Torres described what happened during Marcus's attempted escape from Ohio. Remember, I told you that Marcus was arrested at the Pennsylvania border with cash and laptops? Yes. What I didn't mention yesterday was that state police found something else in his vehicle, a loaded handgun with the serial numbers filed off. Was he planning to use it? According to text messages we recovered from his phone, Marcus was communicating with his gambling contacts about eliminating people who could testify against him. Your name was specifically mentioned in those communications. The blood drained from my face as I realized how close I had come to being murdered. Marcus hadn't just planned to assault and intimidate me. He had been prepared to kill me if necessary to protect his criminal operations. The weapon possession adds another federal charge to his case, Detective Torres continued. More importantly, it demonstrates the level of violence Marcus was willing to use to avoid consequences for his actions. Were there other people on his target list? 3 names total. You, your sister, and Jennifer Walsh, the woman from Indiana who had been tracking his criminal activities across multiple states. He was planning to kill all three of us. The text messages suggest he was considering it as a final option if legal negotiations didn't go in his favor. Marcus's criminal associates were pressuring him to eliminate potential witnesses before their own operations were exposed. The conversation with Detective Torres lasted another 30 minutes, covering additional details about Marcus's network of criminal associates and the evidence that would be used in his prosecution. By the time we hung up, I had a clear picture of just how dangerous Marcus had been and how fortunate my family was to have escaped his schemes with relatively minor damage. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Jennifer Walsh, the Indiana woman who had been tracking Marcus across multiple states. Her voice was warm and sympathetic as she introduced herself and explained her connection to the case. "I've been following Marcus's criminal activities for 2 years," she said. "When I learned about what happened to you and your sister, I wanted to reach out and offer my support." Detective Torres mentioned that you helped with the investigation. "I've been documenting Marcus's pattern of targeting women with financial family connections ever since he victimized me in Indiana. Your case provided the evidence we needed to finally stop him permanently." Jennifer explained that she had been working with law enforcement agencies in multiple states to build a comprehensive case against Marcus and his criminal associates. Her efforts had been largely unsuccessful until my assault and the subsequent investigation provided the breakthrough prosecutors needed. "What happened to you in Indiana?" I asked. "Similar to your situation, but I discovered his scheme before he could complete it. Marcus was planning to use me as guarantor for a business loan that he intended to default on immediately. When I investigated his background and discovered his criminal history, he became violent." "Did he assault you?" "He tried to, but I had already contacted police and was wearing a recording device when we met for our final confrontation. We caught his threats and attempted assault on tape, which led to his conviction for attempted domestic violence." "So you've been tracking him ever since?" "I made it my mission to prevent him from victimizing other women. I contacted law enforcement wherever he moved and tried to warn potential targets when I could identify them." "How did you know he was targeting my family?" "I track his social media activities and monitor public records for mortgage applications in areas where he's living. When I saw his engagement announcement with your sister, I started researching your family's financial situation." "You knew we were potential targets." "I suspected it based on the pattern. Young woman with career struggles, older sibling with business success, close family relationships that could be exploited for financial gain. It matched Marcus's victim profile perfectly." Jennifer's dedication to protecting other women from Marcus's crimes was both inspiring and humbling. She had turned her own victimization into a mission to prevent similar harm to others, dedicating considerable time and resources to tracking a dangerous criminal across multiple states. "Will you be testifying at his trial?" I asked. "Absolutely. My testimony will establish the pattern of criminal behavior that proves this wasn't an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. Marcus is a career criminal who systematically targets vulnerable women for financial exploitation." "What do you think will happen to him?" "With the evidence we have now, including his own documentation and the attempted murder conspiracy, I expect him to spend the rest of his life in prison. He's facing federal charges that carry mandatory minimum sentences, and his criminal history will ensure maximum penalties." The conversation with Jennifer provided the final piece of closure I needed. Marcus wasn't just a violent man who had made poor choices. He was a sophisticated predator who had been systematically destroying lives across multiple states for years. My family's ordeal was part of a much larger criminal enterprise that was finally being dismantled through our collective courage to seek justice. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected visit that would begin the slow process of healing the wounds Marcus had inflicted on our family relationships. I was working in my home office when the doorbell rang, and I found my parents, Robert and Linda, standing on my front porch with serious expressions and a large gift basket. "We brought lunch," my mother said simply, "and we need to have a family conversation about everything that's happened." I invited them in, noting that they both looked older and more worn than I remembered from just 2 weeks earlier. The stress of watching their daughter's relationship implode while dealing with the financial and legal consequences of Marcus's crimes had taken a visible toll on both of them. We sat around my kitchen table with sandwiches from their favorite deli, though none of us seemed particularly interested in eating. My father cleared his throat and began what was clearly a prepared statement. "Fanny, your mother and I owe you an apology. We should have been more supportive after Marcus attacked you, and we should have recognized the warning signs about his character much earlier." "Dad, you couldn't have known." "Actually, we could have," my mother interrupted. "We had concerns about Marcus from the beginning, but we were so relieved that Brielle had found someone stable that we ignored our instincts." The conversation that followed revealed information that fundamentally changed my understanding of how Marcus's manipulation had affected our entire family, not just Brielle and me. The climactic twist came when my parents admitted they had been secretly investigating Marcus for weeks before the assault occurred. "We hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago," my father said quietly. "Something about Marcus's background story didn't add up, and we wanted to make sure Brielle was safe." "You hired a private investigator?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "Thomas Chen, a retired police detective who specializes in background investigations," my mother explained. "He discovered Marcus's criminal history in Kentucky and Indiana, plus evidence of his gambling debts." "When did you get this information?" "The report came back 3 days before Marcus attacked you. We were trying to figure out how to tell Brielle without pushing her deeper into his arms." The revelation that my parents had known about Marcus's violent history while I was being manipulated and assaulted felt like another betrayal, though I could understand their dilemma about how to handle such explosive information. "Why didn't you tell me what you had discovered?" "We planned to involve you in a family intervention after Brielle's birthday," my father said. "Thomas advised us that confronting domestic violence perpetrators directly can escalate their behavior and put victims in greater danger. But I became a victim anyway." "That's what makes this so terrible," my mother said, tears forming in her eyes. "We were trying to protect Brielle by gathering evidence first, but our delay put you at risk." "Did you know Marcus was targeting our family for financial exploitation?" "Thomas suspected it based on the pattern of Marcus's previous relationships, but we didn't have proof until after the police found his computer files." My father pulled out a thick folder containing the private investigator's report. The documentation was comprehensive, including criminal background checks, financial records, and even surveillance photographs of Marcus meeting with known gambling associates. Thomas also discovered that Marcus had been researching our family's financial situation long before he met Brielle, my mother explained. "He had accessed public records about your business, our home ownership, and even Brielle's employment history. So his entire relationship with Brielle was premeditated fraud. From the very beginning, Thomas found evidence that Marcus had specifically targeted the boutique where Brielle worked because he knew she came from a family with financial resources. The systematic nature of Marcus's planning was even more disturbing than I had realized. He hadn't just met Brielle and opportunistically decided to exploit our family. He had researched and selected us as targets before even introducing himself to my sister. What else did the private investigator find? Marcus was living under a false identity when he met Brielle, my father said. His real name is Marcus Andrew Coleman, and he has outstanding warrants in 2 other states for various financial crimes. Outstanding warrants. Identity theft in Kentucky, check fraud in Indiana. He'd been evading law enforcement for 18 months when he moved to Ohio and started using slightly modified versions of his name. So, when Detective Torres arrested him, she was also resolving criminal cases from other jurisdictions. Exactly. Marcus's assault on you triggered investigations that solved multiple unsolved crimes across 3 states. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Fanny, we also need you to know that we increased security around our house and had been monitoring your safety as much as possible without being obvious about it. What do you mean? We installed security cameras and started taking turns driving past your house at different times during the day and evening. When you didn't answer your phone Tuesday night, your father called 911 immediately. You called 911? We were tracking your location through your phone's family sharing feature. When we saw that you were at Ohio State's emergency room, we knew something terrible had happened. The realization that my parents had been secretly protecting me while trying to figure out how to handle the Marcus situation made me feel both grateful and frustrated. Their intentions had been good, but their secrecy had left me isolated and vulnerable during the most dangerous period of Marcus's manipulation. I wish you had told me about your concerns, I said gently. We should have, my mother agreed. Thomas advised caution, but in retrospect, involving you in the investigation from the beginning might have prevented the assault entirely. Or it might have escalated Marcus's violence even sooner, my father pointed out. We'll never know for sure. The conversation continued for several hours with my parents sharing additional details about their investigation and their growing concern for both daughters' safety. By the end of our discussion, I had a much clearer picture of how Marcus's manipulation had affected our entire family, not just his primary targets. What happens now with Brielle? I asked as we prepared to clean up lunch. She's staying with us while she goes through bankruptcy proceedings and prepares for Marcus's trial, my mother said. She's also starting intensive counseling to understand how she became so vulnerable to manipulation. How is she handling everything? Better than we expected. The shock of learning the truth about Marcus seems to have broken through the psychological hold he had over her. Does she want to rebuild our relationship? My father looked at me seriously. She's desperate to make things right with you, but she understands that forgiveness takes time. She's focusing on getting her life back together and cooperating with law enforcement for now. She also asked us to give you this, my mother said, handing me a sealed envelope with my name written in Brielle's handwriting. I decided to read the letter later when I had privacy to process whatever my sister wanted to communicate. For now, it was enough to know that my parents finally understood the full scope of what Marcus had planned for our family, and that they were committed to supporting both daughters through the recovery process. As they prepared to leave, my father shared one final piece of information that would influence my decision about rebuilding family relationships. Fanny Thomas Chen wants to meet with you about preventing similar situations in other families. He's developing educational materials about financial predators and thinks your experience could help protect other women. What would that involve? Speaking at community organizations about recognizing the warning signs of financial manipulation and domestic violence. Your story could save other families from going through what we've experienced. The idea of turning my traumatic experience into something that could help prevent similar crimes felt like a positive way to channel the anger and pain Marcus had caused. It also suggested a path forward that could give meaning to the suffering our family had endured. 3 months later, I sat in the Franklin County Courthouse, watching Marcus face the consequences of his criminal enterprise. The federal courtroom was packed with victims, law enforcement officials, and family members who had been affected by his schemes across multiple states. Marcus looked dramatically different from the confident, manipulative man who had assaulted me in his apartment. Orange jail clothing hung loosely on his diminished frame, and his hair had grown long and unkempt during his incarceration. More significantly, his arrogant demeanor had been replaced by the defeated posture of someone who finally understood that his criminal career was permanently over. Federal prosecutor Sarah Martinez had built an overwhelming case against Marcus, using his own documentation and the testimony of multiple victims. Her opening statement outlined 15 separate felony charges spanning financial fraud, domestic violence, identity, theft, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, the defendant didn't just commit crimes. He operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise designed to systematically exploit vulnerable women and their families across multiple states. The prosecution's evidence included Marcus's detailed computer files, recorded conversations with gambling associates, and testimony from 5 women he had victimized over the previous 3 years. Each victim told a similar story of manipulation, financial exploitation, and escalating violence when their families became suspicious of Marcus's intentions. Jennifer Walsh testified, first describing how Marcus had researched her family's financial situation and planned to use her as guarantor for fraudulent business loans. Her calm, detailed account of his manipulation tactics established the pattern that prosecutors would use to demonstrate Marcus's systematic approach to victimizing women. Brielle's testimony came on the second day of the trial. I had been unsure whether I wanted to attend her appearance on the witness stand, but ultimately decided that supporting her courage to face Marcus in court was more important than protecting my own emotional comfort. My sister looked composed and determined as she described Marcus's gradual manipulation of her perceptions about our family relationships. She spoke clearly about the financial abuse, the psychological manipulation, and her eventual understanding of how completely she had been deceived. The defendant convinced me that my sister was trying to control my life and sabotage my happiness, Brielle testified. He used my insecurities about our relationship to isolate me from the person who was actually trying to protect me. The most powerful moment came when Prosecutor Martinez asked Brielle to explain why she had initially refused to believe my account of Marcus's assault. Marcus had spent months convincing me that Fanny was jealous of my relationship and would do anything to break us up, Brielle replied. When she told me he had attacked her, I thought it was just another attempt to interfere with my engagement. Do you still believe that now? No, I now understand that everything Marcus told me about my sister was a lie designed to prevent me from trusting the one person who could have exposed his criminal activities. Marcus's defense attorney, Robert Kim, attempted to portray his client as someone whose gambling addiction had led to poor decisions rather than a calculating predator who systematically targeted vulnerable women. The strategy failed completely when prosecutors presented evidence of Marcus's detailed planning and his threats to murder potential witnesses. The climactic moment that sealed Marcus's fate came when Detective Torres testified about the evidence found in his vehicle during his attempted escape from Ohio. The defendant was carrying detailed plans for eliminating 3 witnesses who could testify against him, she explained. These plans included specific methods, timing, and disposal strategies that demonstrated extensive premeditation. What was the defendant's intended timeline for these murders? According to text messages recovered from his phone, he planned to kill all 3 witnesses within 72 hours of his arrest warrant being issued. Who were the intended victims? Fanny Hartley, Brielle Hartley, and Jennifer Walsh. The revelation that Marcus had been prepared to commit triple murder to protect his criminal enterprise horrified the jury and eliminated any sympathy they might have felt for his situation. My own testimony came on the 3rd day of the trial. Prosecutor Martinez had prepared me extensively for this moment, but facing Marcus in court still felt emotionally overwhelming. He stared at me with cold hatred as I described his assault and threats, showing no remorse or acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. Ms. Hartley, can you describe the defendant's demeanor after he finished assaulting you? He was completely calm and controlled. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink as if nothing unusual had happened, then gave me instructions about cleaning up my own blood before I left his apartment. What did those instructions tell you about the nature of his actions? That the assault was premeditated and calculated, not a crime of passion. He had planned every aspect of the attack, including how to cover up the evidence afterward. The cross-examination by Marcus's defense attorney was brief and ineffective. My medical records, hospital photographs, and consistent testimony left no room for alternative explanations of what had occurred in that apartment. After 5 days of testimony from 23 witnesses, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 15 felony charges. Marcus showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, though his hands trembled slightly when the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. The sentencing hearing brought closure that exceeded my expectations for justice. Federal Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Marcus to 45 years in federal prison, followed by an additional 15 years on state charges to be served consecutively rather than concurrently. Mr. Coleman, Judge Williams, said before imposing sentence, "You operated a criminal enterprise that destroyed families and traumatized multiple victims across several states. Your calculated cruelty and willingness to commit murder to protect your crimes demonstrate that you represent a continued danger to society. This court sentences you to 45 years in federal prison, without possibility of parole, followed by 15 years on state charges for a total of 60 years incarceration. Given your age and the length of this sentence, it is likely you will spend the remainder of your natural life in prison." Marcus would be 89 years old before becoming eligible for release, effectively ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to victimize vulnerable women and their families. The sentencing hearing concluded with victim impact statements from all 5 women Marcus had targeted. Jennifer Walsh spoke about the 2 years she had spent tracking his criminal activities and her relief that other families would be protected from his schemes. I chose to focus my statement on the positive changes that had emerged from my family's ordeal. Marcus Coleman tried to destroy my relationship with my sister and exploit my family's financial resources, I said. Instead, his crimes have ultimately made our family stronger and more united than we were before. His actions also led to the dismantling of criminal networks that had been operating in multiple states. I hope that other families can learn from our experience and recognize the warning signs of financial predators before becoming victims themselves. After the sentencing, Brielle and I stood together outside the courthouse for the first time since the night of Marcus's assault. The 3 months of legal proceedings had given us both time to process what had happened and begin rebuilding our relationship on more honest foundations. "Thank you for testifying against him," she said quietly. "I know facing him in court was difficult after everything he did to you. Thank you for finding the courage to tell the truth about his manipulation," I replied. "Your testimony helped ensure he'll never hurt another family." We weren't ready for a full reconciliation yet, but standing together as Marcus was taken away in shackles felt like the beginning of healing for our family. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, I found myself in an unexpected role as an advocate for domestic violence prevention and financial fraud awareness. Thomas Chen, the private investigator my parents had hired, had connected me with organizations across Ohio that provided education about recognizing and preventing predatory relationships. My first speaking engagement took place at the Columbus Women's Center on a rainy Thursday evening in March. The audience consisted of 40 women ranging from college students to retirees, all seeking information about protecting themselves and their families from financial predators. 6 months ago, I thought I understood the warning signs of abusive relationships. I began my presentation. I had never imagined that a sophisticated predator could manipulate my sister so completely that she would choose her abuser over her own family. I shared the details of Marcus's systematic manipulation, his assault on me, and the criminal enterprise that law enforcement had uncovered during their investigation. The audience listened with rapt attention, many taking notes and asking thoughtful questions about recognizing similar warning signs in their own lives. The most rewarding part of these presentations was watching audience members have moments of recognition about concerning behaviors in their own relationships or those of family members. After my first presentation, 3 women approached me with specific questions about boyfriends or relatives who exhibited similar patterns to Marcus's manipulation tactics. "My daughter's fiancé has been asking detailed questions about our family's financial situation," one mother confided. "After hearing your story, I'm concerned that he might be targeting her for the same reasons Marcus targeted your sister." I connected her with Detective Torres, who had become a resource for families concerned about potential financial predators. Within 2 weeks, their investigation revealed that the daughter's fiancé had outstanding warrants for financial fraud in another state and was indeed following Marcus's playbook for exploiting family resources. The climactic transformation in my relationship with Brielle came during her own journey toward advocacy work. 3 months after Marcus's sentencing, she had completed intensive counseling and was ready to begin turning her experience into something that could help prevent similar situations. "I want to speak publicly about psychological manipulation and financial abuse," she told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "But I know my credibility is damaged because I initially defended Marcus and attacked you. Your experience as someone who was manipulated gives you a different perspective than mine," I replied. "Potential victims might relate more to someone who understands how easy it is to be deceived by these predators." Brielle's first speaking engagement was at Ohio State University's orientation program for new students. Her presentation focused on recognizing manipulation tactics in dating relationships and understanding how financial predators target college students with family financial support. "I was a 26-year-old woman with a college education and a loving family," she told the audience of 18-year-olds. "I thought I was too smart and too supported to fall for manipulation. But predators like Marcus specifically target women with strong family connections because those relationships provide access to financial resources." Her willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and explain how manipulation tactics work made her presentations particularly effective with young audiences who might otherwise dismiss warnings about predatory relationships. The speaking circuit also connected both of us with other victims and advocates who had experienced similar crimes. We learned that financial predators targeting women with family resources was a growing problem that law enforcement agencies were struggling to address effectively. Jennifer Walsh had continued her advocacy work and had founded a nonprofit organization called Financial Predator Prevention Network. She invited both Brielle and me to join her board of directors and help develop educational materials for law enforcement agencies and community organizations. "The three of us represent different aspects of these crimes," Jennifer explained during our first board meeting. "I'm the victim who escaped. Fanny is the family member who was targeted for retaliation, and Brielle represents someone who was successfully manipulated but found the courage to break free." Our combined perspectives allowed us to create comprehensive training materials that address the full scope of how financial predators operate and the various ways they impact families and communities. The nonprofit work also provided both Brielle and me with a sense of purpose that helped transform our traumatic experience into something positive and meaningful. Rather than simply surviving Marcus's crimes, we were actively working to prevent similar situations from destroying other families. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over," Brielle said during one of our presentations. "I had lost my relationship, my financial security, my self-respect, and my family's trust. But working to prevent other women from experiencing similar manipulation has given me a reason to rebuild my life in a more honest and grounded way." My accounting practice had also grown as a result of my advocacy work. Many small business owners and nonprofit organizations sought my services specifically because they trusted someone who had demonstrated resilience in the face of financial crime. The increased income allowed me to donate significant time and resources to the Financial Predator Prevention Network without compromising my own financial security. It's ironic that Marcus's attempt to destroy my business reputation actually enhanced it. I reflected during one of our family dinners. Clients appreciate working with someone who has first-hand experience dealing with financial fraud and manipulation. My parents had also found ways to channel their experience into helping other families. My father joined the board of a local organization that provided security consultations for families dealing with domestic violence threats, while my mother volunteered with counseling programs for victims of financial abuse. What happened to our family was terrible. My mother said, but the connections we've made and the work we're doing now feel like the best possible outcome from such a traumatic experience. The most significant change in my personal life came through an unexpected connection related to the advocacy work. Detective Torres introduced me to her brother Michael, a licensed therapist who specialized in helping trauma survivors rebuild trust and establish healthy relationships. Michael understood the psychological impact of betrayal and violence in ways that most people couldn't, and his professional background gave him insights into the recovery process that made him an ideal partner for someone rebuilding their life after trauma. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on honest communication and mutual respect for each other's healing journeys. Michael never pressured me to move faster than I was comfortable with, and his understanding of trauma responses helped me navigate the emotional challenges of learning to trust again. "The work you and Brielle are doing together is remarkable," he told me after attending one of our joint presentations. "Most families never recover from the kind of manipulation and betrayal you experienced, but you've found a way to transform it into something that helps other people." "We had good support systems and access to resources that many victims don't have," I replied. "Using those advantages to help other families feels like a responsibility." As the first anniversary of Marcus's assault approached, I realized that my life had become richer and more meaningful than it had been before his crimes disrupted my family. The trauma had been terrible, but the growth and connections that emerged from surviving it had created opportunities for impact and fulfillment that I never would have imagined. 2 years after Marcus Coleman received his 60-year prison sentence, I stood before an audience of law enforcement officials, victim advocates, and community leaders at the Ohio Attorney General's annual conference on financial crimes prevention. The packed auditorium represented the culmination of a journey that had transformed personal trauma into statewide impact on preventing similar crimes. When Marcus Coleman assaulted me in his apartment that June evening, I thought my primary concern was surviving his violence and protecting my financial security. I began my keynote presentation. I had no idea that his criminal enterprise extended across multiple states, or that stopping him would require the courage of multiple victims willing to speak publicly about deeply personal experiences. The audience included Detective Rachel Torres, who had been promoted to head the state's Financial Crimes Task Force, and prosecutor Sarah Martinez, who now trained other attorneys in handling complex domestic violence and financial fraud cases. Their presence reminded me of how many dedicated professionals had contributed to achieving justice and preventing future crimes. Marcus's conviction had indeed led to the dismantling of 3 major gambling operations and the prosecution of 18 associates involved in money laundering, loan sharking, and various forms of financial fraud. His obsessive documentation had provided law enforcement with evidence that resulted in convictions carrying a combined total of more than 200 years in prison sentences. "The most important lesson our family learned," I continued, "is that financial predators succeed by isolating their victims from support systems and manipulating their perception of reality. Prevention requires maintaining open communication within families and trusting our instincts when relationships develop unusually quickly or involve excessive financial entanglement." Brielle had become an integral part of my presentation, sharing her perspective on how manipulation tactics work and how families can recognize when a loved one is being targeted by predators. Her willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and explain the psychological process of being deceived had proven invaluable for audiences struggling to understand how intelligent, educated people can become victims of sophisticated manipulation. "I want everyone to understand that falling for manipulation doesn't make someone weak or stupid," Brielle explained to the audience. "Marcus spent months studying my insecurities and crafting his approach to exploit them. He was a professional predator with years of experience manipulating women just like me." Our joint advocacy work had expanded beyond speaking engagements to include consulting with law enforcement agencies, developing training materials for college campuses, and working with financial institutions to create better screening procedures for loan applications involving multiple family members. The Financial Predator Prevention Network, which Jennifer Walsh had founded after her own victimization, now operated in 12 states and had documented more than 50 cases where their educational materials had helped families recognize and avoid potential victimization. The network's success demonstrates that information and awareness are powerful tools for prevention. Jennifer reported during her portion of our presentation. But we also need systemic changes in how financial institutions verify relationships between borrowers and guarantors. The climactic revelation that brought complete closure to our family's journey came when Detective Torres announced that Marcus had provided information leading to additional convictions in exchange for transfer to a federal prison with better medical facilities for his deteriorating health. Marcus Coleman will never be eligible for release, she assured the audience, but his cooperation has helped us identify and prosecute predators operating similar schemes in other regions. His criminal network has been completely dismantled, and multiple families have been protected from victimization. The medical issues that prompted Marcus's cooperation had developed during his imprisonment, apparently related to stress and poor nutrition. While I felt no sympathy for his declining health, knowing that his criminal career was permanently ended provided the final piece of emotional closure I needed. My personal life had also reached a point of stability and happiness that exceeded my expectations when the trauma first occurred. Michael and I had been married for 6 months, having built our relationship on the foundation of mutual respect and understanding that emerged from shared experience with trauma recovery. "The most beautiful part of your story," he said after attending my conference presentation, "is watching how you and Brielle transformed something terrible into a mission that protects other families." Our wedding had been a small, intimate ceremony that focused on commitment and partnership rather than elaborate celebration. Brielle served as my maid of honor, symbolizing the complete rebuilding of trust and affection between us. "Standing beside you at your wedding felt like the final step in earning your forgiveness," she had told me during our reception dinner. "I know our relationship will never be exactly what it was before Marcus, but I think it's actually stronger now because we've been through something terrible together and survived it." My parents had also found peace with their role in the events that had unfolded. Their decision to hire a private investigator had ultimately provided crucial evidence for Marcus's prosecution, even though their delay in sharing information had contributed to my vulnerability. We learned that protecting family members sometimes requires difficult conversations and immediate action rather than careful planning. My father reflected. "If we had told you about Marcus's criminal history, immediately the assault might have been prevented. But then we might not have uncovered the full scope of his criminal enterprise," I replied, "and multiple other families might still be at risk from his associates." The conference presentation concluded with a call to action that had become central to my advocacy work, encouraging families to trust their instincts about concerning relationships and providing resources for investigation and intervention when predatory behavior is suspected. Prevention requires vigilance, open communication, and willingness to act on concerns, even when those actions are emotionally difficult, I told the audience. But the alternative is allowing predators to destroy families and exploit victims across multiple states. As I looked out at the audience of dedicated professionals committed to protecting vulnerable people from financial crimes, I realized that Marcus's attempt to destroy my family had ultimately led to our greatest contribution to society. The trauma he inflicted had been transformed into knowledge resources and systems that would protect countless other families from similar destruction. The question I wanted to leave with the audience reflected the broader implications of our experience. How many other families in your community might be dealing with similar manipulation and financial exploitation? Right now, what systems can we create to help them recognize the danger and seek help before violence occurs? After the conference ended, Detective Torres approached me with news that provided the perfect conclusion to our journey toward justice and healing. Fanny, I wanted you to know that our Financial Crimes Task Force has received federal funding to expand operations statewide. Your advocacy work and the evidence from Marcus's case were specifically cited in the grant application. What does that mean practically? It means we'll be able to investigate financial predators more aggressively and provide better support for victims and their families. The resources will also fund prevention education programs, like the work you and Brielle are doing. The expansion of law enforcement resources dedicated to preventing financial crimes represented the ultimate victory over Marcus's attempts to exploit and destroy vulnerable families. His criminal enterprise had been eliminated, his associates were in prison, and the systems for protecting future victims had been strengthened significantly. As Michael and I drove home from the conference that evening, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed by surviving Marcus's crimes and choosing to turn that experience into advocacy for other families. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Marcus had succeeded in his original plan? Michael asked as we pulled into our driveway. Sometimes, but I think focusing on what actually happened is more productive. He failed to destroy our family permanently, and his crimes led to positive changes that will protect many other families. Plus, his failure led to us meeting each other. That's the most beautiful outcome of all. As we walked into our home together, I felt profound gratitude for the strength, support, and opportunities that had emerged from surviving Marcus Coleman's attempt to destroy everything I cared about. The trauma had been real and terrible, but the growth connections and impact that followed had created a life richer and more meaningful than anything I could have imagined before. The final lesson I had learned was that surviving victimization isn't just about personal recovery. It's about using that experience to prevent similar harm to others and creating positive change that extends far beyond individual healing. Thank you for following this journey of survival, justice, and transformation. I hope our family's experience can help you recognize the warning signs of financial predators and protect your own loved ones from similar manipulation. Have you ever noticed concerning patterns in someone's relationship that made you worry about financial exploitation or manipulation? What steps did you take to address those concerns, and what resources would have been helpful during that process? I encourage you to like this video if our story provided useful information about recognizing financial predators, subscribe to stay informed about preventing domestic violence and financial crimes, and share this content with family and friends who might benefit from understanding these warning signs. Together, we can create communities that protect vulnerable people from sophisticated predators who target families for financial exploitation. Your awareness and willingness to act on concerns about suspicious relationships could be the difference between prevention and tragedy for someone you care about. Trust your instincts, maintain open family communication, and never hesitate to seek professional help when something feels wrong about a loved one's romantic relationship. Stay safe, stay informed, and remember that surviving trauma can become the foundation for protecting others from similar harm.